Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here, and glad you are back on the Investigative Journal on this Friday. My, how the week goes by one day, and then we got the weekend. And what is it, June 30th, 2017. The month's over with, folks, and we go on to July. A lot of good things I want to talk about today, but it's, again, pedophilia in the news of the Vatican. I'll get to that. And then I want to play an old interview. You're going to be astounded with this one, because many people forget how many people I've interviewed over the years. And Jim Rothstein is one of my favorite. He was an ex-New York police detective who tracked down pedophilia all the way to the doorstep of the Vatican, including Cardinal Spellman in New York. In fact, one of his informants, the one kid that they were going to try to bring down the cardinal with, actually was being abused in the cardinal's rectory, and the kid stole the cardinal's shoes, or one of his shoes, to prove it. And then the cardinal basically said that the kid was a thief. Nothing was ever done, of course, because he was the most powerful man in this country. He's the Archbishop of the Archcardinal of New York, of the Roman Empire, who runs this part of the world. Yes, we're going to talk about that. But first, remember, I'm running a pledge drive at arcticbeacon.com, arcticbeacon.com. Go there, and it goes directly to me. Hit the donate button. And the reason I'm doing it is every now and then we run into financial trouble, and I have to ask for some help because it's a listener-based show, and you know as well as I do, advertisers run when we talk about things like this. So I want to thank Marco from Slovenia. Can you believe it? I get donation from a guy in Slovenia, and nothing from Americans today. Interesting. And Marco's a good guy. I emailed, thanked him. And Slovenia is a country of 2 million people. He speaks Slovenian, his first language, and said he listened to my show for years and wanted to thank me for all that he's learned. And I know there's a lot of you out there like that. Well, listen, I need some help right now, so hit that donate button and it'll go directly to me. If you do the First Amendment thing, it goes to the radio station. And I'm asking you for the next month or two to donate directly to me so I can stay on the radio station. Sounds fair, doesn't it? Okay, so here we go. Cardinal Pell. Do you know who Cardinal Pell is? Well, he's Australia's most senior Catholic and the third-ranking official in the Vatican. Has been charged with multiple sex offenses by police. The charges were served on Pell's legal representatives in Melbourne on Thursday, and they have been lodged also at Melbourne Magistrates Court. He's been ordered to appear at the court on 18 July. Pell is facing multiple charges, and there are multiple complainants, Victoria's Police Deputy Commissioner Shane Patton said. The charges were historical sexual assault offenses. What's that? In a statement released by Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney, 90 minutes after the charges were announced, Pell announced he would return to Australia as soon as possible to clear his name. So the fix in? Pell is the highest-ranking Vatican official to be charged in the Catholic Church long-running sexual abuse scandal. Pell's statement, issued at 4:30 a.m. Rome time, said, quote, "Although it is still in the early hours of the morning in Rome, Cardinal George Pell has been informed of the decision and the action of Victoria Police. He has again strenuously denied all the allegations. Cardinal Pell will return to Australia as soon as possible to clear his name, following advice and approval by his doctors, who will also advise on his travel arrangements. He said he is looking forward to his day in court and will defend the charges vigorously. It is so far unclear what the allegations against Pell have been charged with. Pell was due to make further statement in Rome later on Thursday. I'm not sure what he said. Detectives from Victoria's Sano Task Force, established to investigate allegations that emerged during a parliamentary inquiry into Victoria and the latter Royal Commission, interviewed Pell in Rome in October, about allegations against him. So he knew it was coming down. Last year he cited ill health. Pell declined to return to Australia to give evidence. Okay, so we'll follow that case. But what I wanted to do to follow up on that is to go back to an interview I did. This was back in 2007, April 2007. And it's with a former New York police detective, Jim Rothstein. And he had talked about pedophilia going all the way through the Vatican, and he was working on cases in New York. And I think you're going to be astounded on what you hear if you've never heard this story. And I've done so many hours with him, so hopefully I selected a good interview. If I need to interrupt and clear up anything, I will do that. But here's Jim Rothstein, former New York police detective, regarding pedophilia. Pedophilia rings in this country, and he's investigated them all the way. Well, what he tells you is this. Every time you try to get to the real perpetrators at the top, the investigations are always stopped. So here we go, Jim Rothstein.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal. My second-hour guest is Jim Rothstein. He had an illustrious career as a New York police detective on the streets of New York for many years. He's been on our show before. He works in an area still to this day after his retirement of trying to save Americans' children from the pedophile rings that have sprouted up in this country. That's his main line of work. And we're going to get deep into how this operates today, cases that he's working on today, and what happened to him in the past, which he's discussed before, but I want to go over that. Jim, nice to have you today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on again, Greg.
Jim, your story is so important. You call the biggest terrorist problem in our country the stealing and the kidnapping of our children. I do want to get into that, but let's talk 1 minute. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. The Virginia Tech shootings yesterday, simple, one shooter described now as a 23-year-old Asian, a loner. The media is depicting him. Of course, he'll be depicted as a psychopath. On the other side of the coin, there will be much talk about whether he's a Manchurian candidate, whether he is one of these people that are programmed by our government. One question. It will be near impossible to ever get to the truth because they know how to cover these up, these investigations up. I said at the outset maybe an hour ago, so you probably didn't hear this, I said one thing we should look at is what are they going to do with his body? I know they've cremated these types of people before in the past, and why did they do that if they do that? I think they could find a chip there somewhere if they did a proper autopsy. My question to you is, what should investigators, if we want to get at the truth here, how do they cover these things up? Do they use their CIA assets, their FBI assets, so surreptitiously that we can never get to the bottom of this? Is there any ways you, as a police detective, if you were on this case and you wanted to get to the truth, what would you be looking for?
Well, that's quite simple. Well, first you would start with the very basics. You would go over there and find out and look into the background of this guy and find out just where did he go, what did he do, and the first of all is where did he get the training to use the gun? Did he learn himself or what? And then it wouldn't be very long before you'd see something. If he's just a psycho killer, that would come out very quickly. But if there's anything else in it, you would see that he has connections to other people, where did he go for his training and that type of thing. Then once you get to that point, then you try to find out who was he working for. That would be the steps to follow. And that's very simple and not very complicated to do.
Okay, so you're familiar with how they've covered up investigations. You've said point blank on this show that all the investigations in your specialty, we're going to get into that now, of trying to discover how our children have been kidnapped in these pedophile rings, you've said point blank, with your experience, you've not seen one investigation go to the top. It always gets stopped.
Oh, that's very true.
Go ahead.
That's very true. None of these cases, especially these pedophile cases that go into the upper echelon, has ever been done to the complete, where you came up with everybody that was involved. And that's why, like this Virginia shooting, too, to look at that, you have to look
right, so we're talking about the Columbine shooting. We can talk about now I can't remember the name. There was a shooting in Seattle, maybe a year ago, and there was a couple kids involved in Seattle. I don't know if you remember that case.
Yes.
Yeah, I was following that case, and I got the mother's number, who I could never get through to, and I found out the two shooters were from this small town, and there was another shooting. A friend of this shooter, a kid, was involved in another school shooting in that small town. It was a very suspicious case, but I'll tell you what, from a journalist's point of view, there were no leads to go down. I had a couple informants telling me about these kids and to look for them being a government aid, being controlled, being programmed. And, I could never get to the people I needed to. And, of course, don't have the finances to run around the country like the mass media. And, I wish I did, because that was a case that I believe was more than just a kid going crazy in Seattle. And you say even these cases, you've probably followed these serial killer cases and also these cases of mass shootings. And you say none of these really get to the top, do they?
No, because it's an interesting thing. There's another thing that comes in here. Kelly O'Mara, reporter and investigator I've known many years, just wrote a book called Psyched Out. She has done a lot of these investigations, and then she started looking at these school shootings and that. But I think there's something here as big as all the other things is the cover-up on what's happening with these kids who are taking these drugs that they're giving to kids and how it's affecting them. That's a big enough scandal to cover up everything,
Exactly. And, I did some research on that and look back before this program to drug our children was instituted in I think it was the 70s or so, don't hold me on the dates. But before that, there was not one incident of a shooting in a school.
That's right.
Prior to the instituting of this drug program where the psychologists get kids on Ritalin and all this other stuff. But that's an interesting fact that people need to look at. Before that drug program was instituted, there were no shootings in our schools.
Now, let's look at this drug thing one step closer. You go back to the work that was being done by Dr. Jolly West and that crew at the time when the LSD research and stuff was done. Don't you think if you follow some of these drugs back to see where they came from, you would probably discover one of the biggest scandals we ever had?
Yeah. It's amazing to me. I mean, I've had on stories that go talk about the orphanages, the Duplessis orphans in Canada, who were systematically drugged back in the 50s and 60s, and it leads to serious connections between the CIA, doctors, Nazi doctors, government programs, together with even the Catholic orphanages providing these children who were systematically declared insane and illegally, and then worked upon with many different tests, just test monkeys. Incredible story. The Plessy orphans in Canada, still mass graves there of children that have been covered up by the government. Let's get to your specialty, uncovering these pedophiles. You're still working on it. What's your lady? After they pushed you out of your job in New York, and we're going to get into that. What are you working on now that's of importance to the American people that they should know? Because you call this the biggest terrorist problem in our country. Go ahead.
Well, it is, because if you look at all the children that disappear in our country every year, it's hundreds and hundreds. And then there's the other kids that are molested and used, which goes into the thousands. And then you have the thing where the divorce courts and the social services are used to take kids and totally mess them up. It is bigger than terrorism. We're losing more people to that than we have lost than anything else in this country. And it's not a thing that's happening by itself. Much of this is orchestrated. So I've stayed very active in it, and right now, as you know, the Johnny Gosch case is probably the one case that could blow this wide open. And we're very, moving along quite well on that case. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Tell us, just give us in this couple minutes minutes before our break, a background to this Johnny Gosch case for people who are not aware of it, who have forgotten about it, because it was a kidnapping that took place in the 80s. Go ahead.
Yes, he was kidnapped in 1982. He was the first of a number of newspaper boys that were kidnapped in Iowa, and then there was a boy taken in Minnesota. They tried to kidnap a newspaper boy, but he got away, so the alternate guy to pick on was Jacob Wetterling. And Johnny Gosch's case, and I've been on it for over 10 years now, has never, ever been investigated because, as you know, I've worked very closely with Noreen, the mother, for the last 10 years. And through my research and the contacts I have, we know there was a major cover-up, and there still is to this day. And in fact, at one point, Johnny Gosch did get to go home to visit his mother, and people can't believe, why didn't he just run away and call the cops, and, why didn't the kids stay at home? Well, first of all, why would he call the cops? That'd be the biggest mistake he could ever make, because they didn't want him, because nobody ever investigated it. And we have also the context that this ties back to what turned out to, or is referred to as the Franklin cover-up, which had to do with the Omaha, Nebraska use of children. Right, and everybody knows that was a big cover-up and was tied to the biggest people in our country.
Right, and when you say the question right before our break here, let me just see if I can get this straightened out. Johnny did go home when he was how old?
I was 97. He was, I guess he was about 27, something like that.
And why didn't he just stay at home, according to what the MO on these kind of kidnappings?
Once these kids are gone for 72 hours, they never go home. In fact, before Johnny got to go home, there was a man brought in where the rules were set down that Johnny could go home for 2 hours. He did not go by himself. So you just don't go home. It's known, and you can see in some of the latest kidnappings where these kids have come back, they don't leave. And this is just the way it is.
Well, let's get into that more in depth right after this 3-minute break on the Investigative Journal.
Okay, we didn't take a 3-minute. We took a 3-minute break back in 2007. But I fast-forwarded everything. You'll hear a little bit of bumper music, and we'll be back with Jim.
Short segment here before our first half hour is finished here with Jim Rothstein, a former New York police detective. Jim, at the break I was thinking of this, before we get back to Johnny Gosch and the pedophile problem, that question I posed about this Virginia Tech shooting regarding the autopsy of the shooter, I would bet you they cremate that kid's body. He's a 23-year-old Asian English major from Virginia Tech. And I wonder if they do that to hide a microchip or something like that. What's your thoughts? Because they cremate a lot of these people that are involved in these shootings.
Yes, that's the first sign. If this guy is cremated within the next 2 days or so, you begin to wonder, what are they doing? And why are they cremating this guy? As you know, Greg, you've been in this business quite a while, that this happens quite often when something like this happens.
Exactly, and that's one thing we need to look at, folks. Look at what they do to his body, and that'll give you a clue of what's going on. Jim, back to Johnny Gosch. Why do you call this case? Why do you call this case one that could open this pedophile problem, open it up wide open in our country, and lead to the perpetrators at the top? What do you have now? The evidence.
Well, one of the things, the strongest thing here is that the mother has never been compromised. The mother has never been, they've never been able to take her and promote her for anything. She has stuck to her guns to fight to find her son, and she hasn't gone along with what's politically correct by saying, oh, the cops are doing a great job and they'll find my son. She hasn't done that. That's why this case is the one to go with to expose this whole program. And
right. Go ahead.
Well, and the other thing is, I don't know if you're aware of, but for the last 3 years, we've had a crew working on this, and they've been going around doing some interviews, and we're hoping that this thing, I think I alluded to it with another show, that in a very near future, this information will be available for the public. Again, is it going to be like the conspiracy of silence where they try to cover it up? We don't know yet. But I do know that they have found many new clues, not only on the Johnny Gosch case, but this whole Franklin cover-up, as it's referred to, and other parts of this child kidnapping stuff.
Tell us about the photos that have come across Noreen's desk and yours regarding Johnny Gosch.
Yes, a number of months ago, we received a number of photos via the internet from Tim White working with Jimmy Gibson. Jimmy Gibson is also a victim, and right now the typical thing happened within weeks after he made those photos available. Jimmy Gibson has been arrested for transporting 260 kilos of cocaine, and which is typical, they got to make sure the guy has no credibility. But as a result of those pictures, we have come up with another 260 pictures showing children in bondage, tied up and all kinds of different, just horrible things. And what we've been able to do is penetrate that subculture, and somebody is starting to cooperate. So we're trying to convince these people to come forward even more so that we can find out where these pictures are coming from and who's taking them. It's a slow progress, but we are making a lot of progress.
Now, Noreen Gosch, Johnny Gosch's mother, has been on my show, and I will get her back to update this story. She has a website displaying these pictures that were sent, and that's at, I believe, johnnygosch.com, where you can see this. So you can go to johnnygosch.com, G-O-S-C-H, and see what Noreen tries to alert the public of what's happening. Question regarding these photos. Why were they released? Who was releasing them? And what do you think the motives are here behind the people that were releasing them to you?
I'll tell you that I have thought of many days, but it took me 2 years, not only myself, some people, good people that have helped me, to get these pictures. I first got word of pictures years ago, and finally we started getting some information that these pictures might be made available, and we did get the first group. At the same time that those 5 photos came forward that night, I was also told that the photos in Omaha, Nebraska were available to me, and there were supposedly 6,000 photos. These photos did show some abuse taking place, which would make it child porn, and I didn't have the backing, from law enforcement to go pick these up, and it's a typical way to set a guy up. You go pick these pictures up, and they got you for possession of child porn. And I didn't go, and they were in Omaha for 48 hours, and when I couldn't get there, they disappeared again. So we know there are more pictures. Why they've come forward, I honestly believe that it's one of two things. Number one, somebody wants to sink, because it's been my experience that these things will be given to me to destroy somebody. One faction is going to be taken out by the other.
Okay, so wow, that was good timing. We're both taking a break at the same time. Me back in 2007, and now here in 2017. What timing, Greg? Everything, is a matter of timing, right? Well, listen, I'm going to come back with Jim Rothstein, so you stay right there. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, folks, that was a quick 3 minutes. We're back for the last segment of the Investigative Journal in this week. It's a Friday, June 30th. And we're talking to Jim Rothstein, who I interviewed back in 2007 regarding the pedophilia rings in this country. And I thought it was appropriate to bring this interview back because of what happened today in the news with Cardinal Pell, third highest ranking cardinal or Vatican official, is now having to go back to Australia to face charges of pedophilia on multiple counts. So we'll follow that story. It doesn't surprise me in the least. Now, go to my website, arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade in what I call the Vatican-led New World Order, a show that's been called the alternative to the alternative media. So come on, folks, donate. Hit that donate button at arcticbeacon.com. And I'm telling you, help me keep this show on the air. It's that important right now. Because every now and then you run into financial problems. This show is not going to be funded by any big advertisers that have money to do it because they want to stay away from the truth. They don't want you to know the truth. They want you to go around walking around like a zombie, buying their products. So anyway, do that, please. ARCTICBEACON.com. Now, going back to, I got to say this. I just thought of this. I do a lot of shows, and I did this show the other day that had so many great subjects, and I was talking about the Vatican, and I mean, there were so many good things that people could have latched onto. And I just in passing, I sometimes do a number of little quick things, little quick tidbits. And one of the tidbits I said was, do you ever wonder, would you like to know when you were going to die? And I said, in my life, sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no. Did you know that in the emails I got, that's all I got from that show? People telling me, no, I don't want to know the day I die. Others saying, well, are you sure? Who's going to tell you? And I'm going, well, I don't know. But anyway, I'm just asking you hypothetically, would you like to know the day you die? And as I sit here today, I think I would. And the reason is because I don't fear death. I think people that say they don't want to know the day they die fear death. Why? It's very interesting to me to think about it that way, right? So let's say I knew I was going to die in 2000. I better not give a day because that would be freaky if it happened. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. So I know the day. I go, okay, I know I'm going to die. I got X amount of time. I could really organize and plan my life out. Don't you think it would make a difference in your life if you knew it was going to be a month or if you knew it was going to be 10 years? Start planning and doing things differently. I think that would be, it's like death planning. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. Jim Rothstein. Yes, Jim, I don't know if we get into it in this half hour, but if you go back to his history, he was a New York cop that got involved with the pedophile rings in New York and traced it. He even got a phone call from Pope John Paul I because they were trying to clean it up 10 days before John Paul was killed. Incredible stories. And he was working with a Father Ritter out of the Covenant House in Brooklyn, I guess. And Father Ritter was one of the good guys. And guess what? When they had all, what they did is the powers that be tried to smear Ritter, which they did. And the Covenant House no longer was there with him. He was a broken man, as Jim said. But he was compiling information on the real cover-up. And when he went to the DA in New York at the time, guess what? They shut him down. Jim went through a lot. He also, when he was really getting close to the top, guess what? The chaplain came to him, who's a Catholic, and said, listen, Jim, it's either, you take we're going to give you everything, early retirement, full pension, or, you might not be around. He didn't put it quite in those terms. You might be killed. But prior to that, him and his partner, Manny who was his partner? Rosen, I can't remember who his partner was. They were offered $1 million each to lay low and get off the investigation. They refused. So anyway, back to Jim Rothstein. Here we go.
Before I get back to my guest, Jim Rothstein, a former New York police detective. One, you can listen to the investigative journal at republicbroadcasting.org and also many other shows on RBN Live. So every day here from 11 to 1. Also, I want to mention that support that Truckers Truck Out that's coming April 23, 24, and 25. Truckers around the country will be boycotting this move by President Bush to allow Mexican trucks across our borders, and that's an issue that I support wholeheartedly. My dad owned a trucking company, and so support those truckers. April 23, 24, and 25. There's a website that I will give out. I'm going to ask my producer to get me that website that's supporting this. I'll give that out later in the show. Back to Jim Rothstein. Jim, a couple questions here regarding, we left off, I forgot to get back to you on the question. Johnny Gosch was allowed to return when he was in his 20s to his mother. Was he so brainwashed, programmed, that he couldn't leave for threat of his life and maybe others, his mother's life?
Yes, and I have found that in other cases that I worked on over the years, even when I was a detective. We had kids that we got to that never would go back home. And the way this works, it's a very subtle way, the way they work the kids, and then they get them to a certain point where they basically let them know that if they ever skip out or anything, that they will be killed, their parents will be killed, and everybody. And the biggest thing of all is they lead them to believe that their parents have either sold them to them or, whatever it takes. And that's why these kids won't go home. But in Johnny's case, there was a meeting that took place. This is very important, that there was a meeting where a handler met with a guy who had done a lot of work on the Johnny Gosch case. In fact, had done an investigation for one of our intelligence agencies, was called to Chicago, where there was a meeting held, and they worked out the details that Johnny could go home. So it's not like this was a free thing for Johnny to do.
Mm-hmm. So this was planned.
Yes, very well planned, very coordinated, and very well supervised.
Okay, we're going to get Noreen on again and discuss that case in depth on another show. Jim, let's go back to your duties with the New York Police Department. Why have these cases been covered up? Just give us a little background on you, and also don't forget about our good friend, the District Attorney Morgenthau, that is still covering up these cases. He's still a DA in New York. Give us a little background on how you got involved, and a little bit on what you think are the real high-up perpetrators here, the higher-ups that are perpetrating these pedophile rings. Go ahead.
Well, I really got started back, I got out of the police department in 1965, in February, and it was about 1966. In uniform, I was assigned to Midtown Manhattan, and what I began to see were all these young girls coming from the Midwest with these pimps, and I started watching that and recording it and keeping track of them, and it didn't take long where a cop making an arrest undercover was killed by a pimp, and that's how I got brought in, because I'm the only guy that had any records on this. And these were all young kids from the Midwest, anywhere from 13 to 15, 16 years old, that have been kidnapped, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and thousands of kids. So it took a while, and we started working on it, and as we got into this, we fell into the stuff with the pedophiles. And at one point I was told that I should be careful because I was stepping on toes. And I knew what that meant, because this was an informant of mine, and years later I found out that she had in fact been working in a house of prostitution that was run by our intelligence community, which came out in the Frank Olson case. I don't know if you remember that, with the CIA guy who supposedly committed suicide on the LSD tests and stuff like that, and it turns out it was a murder.
Yeah, now, I don't want that to go by. I want to emphasize this, folks, and I hope you heard that. The CIA intelligence operating prostitution rings. My God. I know this is going to go high, go way, way to the top. Let's continue, Jim.
Well, I mean, this was documented. This is not only me saying it, because I had an informant that told me that, but now, like I said, in the Frank Olson case, which also ties in with this schools thing, because it had to do with the experimentation of drugs on mind control, which is what we have here. And that's how I really got into it. And then I developed these informants. At one point, the gay community, at that time, if you were gay or homosexual, it was quite common for people to go out and beat the hell out of you and take your money and everything else. Well, we were able to penetrate this because we helped a couple of these guys that were victims of extortion. And once I got into that, I found out that they were using children, and it had a name for it. It was called human compromise. And they were actually using children to compromise high officials, may it be in our military, our government, or in businesses, so they could get these guys to do what they had to do. Well, it was a very noble thing that they started with, was to fight communism. Now, there came a point where one of my informants told me about an incident on East 64th Street in New York where they were compromising a number of people one night, and they had 3 children, 2 14-year-olds and a 15-year-old, and in their sexual tryst, they killed the 3 boys. And that was what really got me into this deep shadow underground where the children were being used.
Amazing. Tell us where this led and how deep and high this really went, and why you were let go, why you were bribed to more than $1 million to get off the case. Tell us where this went. People are going to be shocked when they hear this. Go ahead.
Well, once we identified, and it's very hard to identify somebody in the covert intelligence operations, but we did. In fact, we not only identified them, we served them with a subpoena for the New York State Select Committee on Crime. And when I say we, it was myself and my partner, Matty Rosenthal. We actually served a subpoena on the man, and it was served in Locust Valley, New York. Yes. But and he told us, before you get back to your office, this subpoena will be squashed. And guess what? We were less than an hour from the office, and by the time we got there, national security was invoked, and he never responded to the subpoena. So that let us know that we were right in all of our findings on how high this really went. Because if it was at this level, it meant it covered not only the government end of it, but every other thing too. And when I say by everything else, I mean businesses and you name it. And you yourself had worked on the Vatican stuff, which brought the Vatican into the picture. So that's how we really got into it.
How did the Vatican get into the picture here? Because this goes deep to the death of Pope Paul I and Father Ritter in the Covenant House, who you say was a good man trying to get at the truth, and how this also involved who you call one of the most dangerous, before he died, dangerous and powerful people in our country, Cardinal Spellman. Go ahead.
Yes, well, about the same time that this happened, with the same informants, we received an informant from the Vatican who had been molested in the Vatican, a young man, and we got him from the confessional of Father Bruce Ritter. So we started working with this young man, and there came a point when John Paul I was made the Pope. Me and my partner were called into Father Bruce Ritter's office, and that night Father Bruce Ritter was given a special dispensation and ordered by John Paul I to clean the pedophiles out of the church and to clean up the Vatican bank scandal. Like I said, we had the informant right out of the Vatican, a young man. I knew him by the name of Dale Smith, Dale St. Clair, which was not his real name, but he was the guy that got us into it. And about 10 days later, the Pope was dead, and the informant told us that he had been murdered. That's how our Vatican investigation started. With Father Bruce.
Unbelievable, because there's more evidence coming out from you, hearing it firsthand. First, the phone call from Pope John Paul I, then how he was killed 10 days later and put in, and then John Paul II takes over, who basically is working with these people and did nothing to clear up the Vatican bank scandal or the pedophile problems in our country. Tell us what happened to Ritter and yourself after this.
It wasn't long after that where...
Don't forget Spellman. Don't forget what Spellman's role is here. Go ahead.
Well, Spellman at the time was, and this goes back from even earlier in the late 60s when I first started working this, I had an informant who gave me, in fact, this guy used to supply the little boys to Spellman. He was one of Spellman's procurers, but he was also an informant of mine. So to make sure, now we're getting into 1970, to make sure that Spellman didn't mess with me, he gave me a young boy who had been caught in Spellman's apartment and arrested for stealing his shoes. So if anybody don't believe it, they can look up the court records. Anyhow, the next day Spellman went to court and just said, oh, this is a misguided youth. I forgive him because the kid would have ratted him out. But my informant gave me that, so I didn't worry about Spellman because Spellman was the key guy in the country that was behind all of this.
So you had an informant, you had his shoes, and so Spellman left you alone because he could have ordered your death if he wanted to, correct?
Well, I guess he could have, but that'd been another story. Then we would have had to do what we had to do, you know. But that's how I stayed away from Spellman, and he didn't bother me. Then when Spellman died, you know, they covered everything up. It just kept going on and on.
Do you think Egan, who's in there now, is still involved in this? Cardinal Egan?
Well, naturally, probably the most decadent place in the world when it comes to pedophilia was New York City. And he's there. There hasn't been one scandal that has surfaced in Manhattan, where he is, you know, where St. Patrick's Cathedral is. And that's not hard to figure out. Who became the Manhattan District Attorney? None other than Morgenthau. And I had the occasion where we went for a wiretap, and we had information which came from our informant and Ritter about a guy named Abrams who was running a real high echelon pedophile call boy service. Anything could happen when you went to this, and we wanted a wiretap because this would have taken us right into Washington, because we had some other cases going in Washington, D.C., and we would have been able to crack the very top of it. But what happened was Morgenthau sent his detectives up there to bust the place and take all the records so that we couldn't get anything out of it. And we never got the wiretap either. So that's how this whole case basically ended. And it was about that time when things started falling apart, because it was in the early part of the year, I had also arrested Frank Sturgis, which was another CIA guy. And that's when they shut me down completely.
Yeah, and people and listeners, go to some of my other interviews with Jim Rothstein, and he'll talk about how Sturgis, a.k.a. Frank, what was his last name? Farini, actually explained to Jim Rothstein how Kennedy was killed and how he was involved with this hit squad. Go to my website, arcticbeacon.com, and I have that interview up regarding Frank Sturgis. So we don't have time to get into that today. Tell us finally what happened to you and to this Father Ritter who ran the Covenant House. We got a few minutes here before this break and then a few minutes after, so go ahead, Jim.
Well, the first thing came right after we did this stuff. We were called to a meeting, and when we got there, that was myself and my partner, there were 2 suitcases full of money. Each one had $1 million that they wanted us to take just to forget what we were doing. And I never forget, my partner took a bundle of $100 bills, and it was in a bar, and threw it right out in the middle of the floor and told them it wasn't enough money, and we got up and left it. We turned corruption complaints in on each other, and that was the start of it. Then they tried to threaten us and harass us, and finally I was offered a disability pension to retire, and, you know, the alternative was guy was going to get killed. And so I retired, but that was still okay because Ritter was still in there fighting. And then I left the state of New York, and the next thing I hear is that they had gone after Bruce Ritter. They falsely accused him. They had a bunch of kids that I knew that accused him of molesting them, which was a total lie because through the years, from the very first, when Ritter started on the east side, they had 3 children that he was taking care of, till the day that they got him, I had constantly had informants in his operation. And if there was anything wrong, we would have known about it. In fact, I was asked two times before this to investigate Ritter, and both times he came up squeaky clean. And then
what happened to the Covenant House and him then in the end?
Well, at the end, they just totally destroyed him, and the Covenant House was turned over to some other people, and I think it's still going on, but it was never what Ritter had. I mean, I don't know. I never dealt with him again, and I would never do it. But what was interesting is that when I contacted the Cardinal in New York at that time, I believe it was O'Connor, to ask him why they're letting Ritter take a fall when they knew he was innocent. And the Cardinal told me, he says, well, there's nothing we can do right now. It's just too big. And he said, but I'll give you a name to call. And it was none other than Peter Grace of Grace Shipping. And he's the guy I dealt with after that.
And what was his involvement?
He was the highest lay Catholic at the time. Peter Grace was a W.R. Grace Shipping. And he was he was in the Knights of Columbus and the Knights of Malta and whatever else you want to call. And he was the very powerful man in the church at the time.
Let's talk about that right after this 3-minute break. We'll be back with former New York.
Okay, so almost good timing. We only got a couple of minutes left in the show. But anyway, I've got a trivia question for you before we go. There is a passport that's given out to 500 people in the world. It is considered to be the most important passport in the world, and only 500 people have it. Tell me who those people are, what organization or country they're with, or affiliation on Monday. Go ahead. Okay, wasn't that fantastic with Jim Rothstein, what we really learned here? Now, if anybody out there thinks that the government and the Vatican don't work together, and the CIA and the mob and all these people, boy, I'll tell you what, Jim is a good source. I mean, everything factual, documented. He's not afraid to call it as it is. It's all there. And I think you see, he did say one thing to me when we did this in 2007 and 8. He said, he'd been working on this since the 70s, and pedophilia is getting worse. Can you imagine 10 years now it's even worse? Well, we're all out of time this week. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you Monday on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.